This is the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 185, where today CJ and I sit down with Microsoft's Richard diZerega to talk about bots and Microsoft Teams development. Recorded live March the 7th, 2017. The Microsoft Cloud Show is sponsored by Valid.nl. Valid's motto is stay ahead. Its mission is to enable its customers to excel in their business through the innovative use of IT. Valid is always on the lookout for new colleagues. Are you interested in all things happening in Azure, whether in infrastructure, SQL Server, Office 365, BI, SharePoint, or .NET? Look them up on Valid.nl. Good day, CJ.
Yo!
How's it going, man?
Pretty good, mate. How are you?
I'm doing fairly okay. So this is a...
Fairly okay. I like that.
I think we're going to try and keep our intro on this one fairly slim because we got a really good discussion we did with Richard diZerega. I hope I said that right. I've always just heard of Richard or Rich, and so I think I got it. Is it diZerega?
I think so.
That's what I say.
It's one of those elusive things that you just got to say it really fast and hope he doesn't notice.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll have like 4 or 5 beers, and then I'll say, I never hear.
That's right. It probably gets better with it's the Richard diZerega. Sounds better after 4 beers routine. Yeah.
Oh, true. So, hey, this is going to be an episode of complete time shifting, right? So we are recording our introduction here on March the 7th, yet we sat down with Rich about a week or two ago on February the 28th to do this interview. And we're not going to publish this for 2 weeks. So we go, because next week I'm going to Mexico for a week with family on spring break. So this is all like time shifted around, but
what if the world's totally changed? I mean, in that time, we're going to have to think up a backup plan.
Oh, it totally. I just hope I can get back to the country. But no more no politics. But
I think you'll be fine, dude. If they let me back in, I think you're good.
It's true. This is true. So I thought that before we rolled the interview, I thought we just kind of preface it a little bit and kind of give our thoughts on what the topic is. So we sat down with Rich frankly, this was one of those things where CJ and I all of a sudden kind of looked at each other. We listened to Richard on the show. We talked to him on a semi-daily basis, it seems, as we're in our little group that we're in. And out of the blue, I realized that I don't think we've ever had Rich on the show because I talk to him all the time and I listen to his podcast, so I hear him all the time. And then all of a sudden I realized, in 3+ years, we haven't had Rich on the show. So he had recently been doing a bunch of work around extending the Microsoft Teams product and also playing a lot with the Microsoft Bot Framework. And I thought that it would be a really cool thing to get him on the show and to see how it goes. So what did you think about, have you done anything with bots or with Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, we're doing not so much with Teams yet, but we're definitely working with bots and the bot framework and things like that for Hyperfish. We have a little bot that reaches out to people and asks them about their profile details and reminds them to go and update their profile and things like that. And so we've been doing quite a bit of work with that, with the bot framework for the Slack bot, and then also for Skype for Business. Not in the bot framework yet, but working around some bot stuff there. So yeah, it was definitely a very interesting topic. But Rich is just an interesting guy in general, and he's been in the space a long time, always such a great help to people, always a really helpful and supportive guy. So I'm really glad we got him on the show finally to talk about this stuff, because it's just very inspiring and things like that, at least I find. And he's a great developer too, so knows his stuff inside out, back to front, and it's great to get on the show to talk about this.
Yeah, he's a great developer, and he's one of those ones that I know in the stuff that I've talked to him about or watched the work that he's done, that when Rich says, yeah, I've looked all around and I can't figure it out, or I don't think that there's a way to do this, I'm like, well, then there's not a way. I mean, there's flat out not a way. If Rich can't figure it out, then there's not a way.
Exactly.
But so we sat down with him. So I figure we'll go ahead and we'll run the interview now. It's a fairly long interview, about 50 minutes. So we go ahead and first do a word from our sponsor and then roll right into the interview.
ShareGate makes it easier for organizations to adopt and use the latest Microsoft productivity tools, helping millions of users be happier and more productive at work. ShareGate is trusted by over 10,000 IT admins from over 110 countries to manage, migrate, and secure their SharePoint and Office 5 environments. ShareGate is recognized as the must-have tool for day-to-day administration of on-premises, cloud, and hybrid environments. Interested in learning more? Check us out at ShareGate.com to learn how ShareGate can make you more productive.
All right. Hello, everybody. I am sitting here today virtually with Richard diZerega from Microsoft and CJ. So Richard is a principal software engineer at Microsoft, where he helps developers and software vendors push the limits of Microsoft software and services. Although Richard's been involved with developers across a wide variety of technologies, he is most known for his work on cloud productivity solutions backed by Office 365. Richard is a passionate technology evangelist and a frequent speaker at worldwide conferences, trainings, and events, and he co-hosts the weekly Office 365 Developer Podcast and the Office Dev Show on Channel 9. Richard, welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show.
Thanks, man. I'm going to have to borrow that, let you be like my intro to everything.
As a frequent guest of your podcast, people might recognize my voice.
I know.
Hey, we were just saying before the show that we can't believe that we haven't had you on the Cloud Show before. This is craziness. What's happened?
I don't know. I guess I just had to mature a little bit and get a better radio voice. Although I think you guys finally said his voice is never going to get any better. Let's just go ahead and have him. Let's just bite the bullet.
No. I can definitely tell you, man, your podcast, the Office 365 Developer Podcast, you really leveled up ditching Jeremy and picking up Andrew Coates, man. I think that it is challenging for me every time I listen to your show, because you're always like, so Andrew, and I'm like, yeah. So I always feel like I'm being addressed when I'm listening to your show sometimes, but at any rate, so
you think the IQ, both like Hyperfish went up, and also the Office 365 Developer Podcast also went up when Jeremy left?
I don't know, but I couldn't get rid of the accent, man. I always say, being from Texas, I have like the most uneducated sounding accent in the world, and so I have this dream of someday having a co-host that makes me sound a little bit more intelligent, but it just not to be yet.
So you've got Australia. You also got the Australian British mix going on there. I will say, if you moved a little bit farther east, it does work having a Kiwi on the show. Although people do have called in and said that CJ is from Australia or from India. That was the funny one.
Yeah, hey, it's all the same, right? It's all, thousands of miles from the US.
Yeah, New Zealand's just it's Eastern Australia, right?
Yeah, well, we like to call Australia the West Island of New Zealand, personally. But
awesome. Hey, Richard, we wanted to have you on the show. You've been doing a lot of work recently around. I've seen you blogging about bots. I've seen you blogging about Microsoft Teams-based development. And so we wanted to get you on the show and talk a little bit about this, because I know this is a hot area and we've got to be getting close. If I've missed it, at least I've seen on my phone it's version 1, but Teams has got to be getting to GA any day now, it seems. So I wanted to get you on the show and we definitely share some of the work that you've been doing here. So can you tell us a little bit about how you started to kind of start playing with the Microsoft bot framework and working with bots?
Sure. So actually last year, my team within Microsoft, so I work for Microsoft, and my little team actually owns the Build conference and all the big keynotes that we do. And so last year, actually around this time last year, we started working with Satya and all the leadership within Microsoft to figure out what was going to be some of our big go-to things at Build for developers. And bots turned out to be one of them. If you paid attention to Build last year, bots was one of the big, I guess, stories out of Build. And so I started doing things related to the keynote, and I ended up owning something that really didn't get a lot of show in the keynote, but it was something that was launched at Build, which was the Build bot. And that was just a bot built with the bot framework that helped you find information while you were at Build. You could ask it, hey, I'm looking for a good identity session today, and it would give you responses, or where's lunch at? You could just kind of ask it open-ended questions and it would respond. And so that's really what got me first working with the bot framework. And I think I learned a lot from that first bot, and that's kind of formed a lot of the work since.
So that Build bot that you did, I remember we were doing things like asking, where's Jeremy Thake presenting? So it would come back and it would actually say things back to you. So around the concept around bots, is this, for people who haven't spent any time with this, that would be me, what kind of stuff do you end up having to do when you're building a bot? I'm sure that there's some dev associated with it, but how much of it do you have to, I don't know what the right term is to use here, train it? So how much do I have to say, anticipate that it knows that when I ask, where is Jeremy Thake presenting? Where is Richard presenting? How much do I have to tell it to understand that, when it gets this thing as a variable, how does it know to use that as a lookup?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny. One of my colleagues, he breaks it down pretty interesting. He talks about a bot is really just an application. It's just an app, and you have to think about it in a similar way that you would deliver an application. So even though there's not a traditional user interface, there's still a user experience you have to think through. And so at its just like foundation, a bot built with the bot framework is really just a web service. You have a REST endpoint that messages get posted to, and you respond back with data. That's really all it is. You can, on top of that, do all kinds of things. So if I wanted to, probably the most exact user experience I could deliver to a user is where they never type in anything, they just select from options. So I could say it'd be hard for something like the build bot, but imagine something that just has a menu system. Like I come in and I want conference information, and you could say, look up speaker, look up topic, or look up miscellaneous information. And maybe the first step would be to select speaker. And then maybe, I don't know how you do it. Maybe you could have like a range, last names that start from A to N or something like that. So you could actually deliver a bot where a user never has to enter in any information. Now, I don't think that would probably provide the best user experience. So you start to have to think about some logic and how you can actually respond to these things in the right sort of ways. And there's really two trends that we've found that are really valuable technologies that you can use with bots. One is what we call Lewis, and Lewis is a cognitive service that Microsoft has, one of our cognitive services, that allows you to build intent-based logic. So you could say, well, one of the user's intents might be to look up a speaker. One might be to look up a session. And then inside of those intents, you can train it with different entities that you could pull out. So Jeremy Thake might be a speaker that you pull out. And so when you said, hey, where is Jeremy speaking? The intent there might be, the fact that it uses where at the front, it might be, well, the intent is he's looking for a room. Well, the entity was Jeremy Thake. So you could kind of infer that to deliver a more exact query. And I guess thirdly, just speaking of queries, the last kind of area that we found to be really complementary to building a bot is Azure Search. So you can imagine that even with intents, you can't predict everything that a user might try to ask a bot. And so we found that Azure Search is actually a really nice technology to put in there that, at the very least as a backup, that maybe we can pull out certain keywords that they used and be able to deliver something that's helpful. And at least from there, we might actually get a relevancy or a competent, like how competent we are that what we're sending back to the user is really something that's valuable to them.
Yeah, gotcha. So it sort of feels to me like, we've had desktop applications for a long time. And whenever the trend became web apps, and everybody sort of built their websites and intranets and all that sort of stuff. And then mobile apps was kind of like the next big trend and things. And it feels a little bit like bots are not necessarily the entire application, but perhaps augment an existing application, or just another sort of facet on the user experience to how you interact with an app, right? And you could have all three, right? You could have a desktop app, a mobile app, a website, and a bot all talking to the same application. But is that kind of where you think Microsoft are taking this? Is it sort of it's just another way to interact with an application, another user experience?
I do. I do think that there are some scenarios where you might be able to deliver all of the functionality in a bot. I think those are probably a little bit fewer and far between, although I will say, without getting into all the details of the bot framework, certain bot channels actually allow you in your bot to deliver an actual UI. You can actually use controls and various things in how the bot interacts. And that starts to really blur the line of having an application. But let's take like one of the examples you gave is you could go off and build a mobile application. You could build it, using all the great cross-platform tools. Maybe you use Cordova and Ionic, or maybe you use Xamarin. You still have to kind of understand the different platforms, because there are some nuanced differences even with a cross-platform tool. But even beyond that, you have to get someone to install your mobile application at some point. Getting monthly active users is a challenge for any app builder. With a bot, I can build a bot and the user really doesn't have to install anything. They can immediately run logic on existing applications like Facebook Messenger or Slack or Skype or Microsoft Teams that have, in the case of like Facebook Messenger, billions of users. So I don't have to get those billions of users to install anything. They can just start using my logic automatically.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I can see the value in that too. I mean, I've seen where some people do like what is it called? Like GitHub engineering blogs about their use of, I think it's Humboldt, where they have the way that they deploy all their code is all done that same way, where they'll, I want to do a deployment and it kind of freezes an environment, lets people deploy it and look at all the experiences coming from it. Makes it a little bit easier, kind of guides people too down a path of like what you want them to do. So you mentioned the build bot. What other kind of bots have you been involved in in your work with this so far?
Yeah, I have a pretty deep background in Office 365 like you guys do, and so I a lot of times when my team that's more based out of we just do anything related to cloud services. When I get some sort of task of, hey, this is kind of the new big thing our team's going to be pushing, I try to find ways to dovetail in my background into that. And so one of the first things that I looked to do was we were going to build a Microsoft Graph Explorer bot. So if you think about Graph Explorer that's on the graph.microsoft.io site, it allows you to kind of play around with the Microsoft Graph and explore it. And the vision around the bot was we were going to build a bot version of that and maybe even be able to, in the back end, turn on some sort of logging so you could actually see the graph queries that were getting sent into the graph. Interestingly, we got pretty far with this and it got squashed. We decided to discontinue it mainly because of some of the things that are coming with Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams is going to have a Who bot built into it that is going to, in a lot of sense, do anything that a Graph Explorer bot would be able to do. It's not part of the preview, at least in the capacity that it'll eventually be in, but it's going to kind of be the showcase bot for integrating with the graph. But out of that, we did identify some challenges of, well, how do you authenticate a user in a bot? Like imagine I'm using Facebook Messenger, but I want to reach into, maybe I have a bot that helps me manage my GitHub repos, and that has its own kind of identity management of its own. How would I do OAuth to be able to get to my data in GitHub or OAuth to get to my data in the Microsoft Graph? And so we looked at building some libraries, some packages that you could plug into the bot framework. Matt Veloso, one of my colleagues, he actually built one for .NET called I got to get these the right way. He called it the Auth bot, which sounds like it is a bot of its own. It actually sounds like a bot. But then we had another group within my organization that had built a library for Node, and it was a lot more generic. So Matt's Auth bot really just worked with Azure Active Directory. So it kind of managed that whole flow of authenticating and getting tokens for Azure AD. The Node version, because Node has so many more open source things available to it, the author of that package, he used Passport.js, which I said, really, hey, anything that's OAuth 2, we can handle. And so I've kind of owned this as a re-architecture of the .NET version so that it can handle more than just Azure Active Directory. In fact, it'll handle pretty much anything that's OAuth 2 now. So that was been one of the big ones, was working with how we might deliver a more generic version of an auth library with bots.
I heard you talking about one too when you were, or one, I guess, capability of it. In one of the episodes you did on your podcast recently, where you referred to something called a back channel. What is this? I mean, that sounded really interesting. I wasn't entirely clear on what this was.
Yeah, this is funny. It goes along a lot of the same lines as what CJ was kind of questioning is, this concept of a bot. You can have other apps, but one of the things we found really popular is software vendors looking to embed bots in their applications. And so we actually do have a lot of things in the bot framework that support that concept of embedding a bot in their app. So we have things like there's a web chat component it's basically just a React component you can throw on any sort of web page and embed a bot in there. But we found that like that's not quite enough. Like just embedding a bot, I mean, that feels very much like the old app model of, well, I'll just throw an iframe on my page and we'll have this little thing that just runs in that iframe. It's not very smart in where it's running. And so what we did is when a bot communicates, it's again just communicating with that REST endpoint. It's just sending messages. Well, messages have a type. So there's behind the scenes, there's all these system messages that get sent. There's pings to make sure that a service is up. There's things like a conversation changed event. So if an additional person is added to a conversation, because you can have group conversations, obviously, we can actually notify the bot that occurs, that a new person is in the conversation. So there's all these system type of messages that already get passed to the back end. So we decided to kind of exploit that in a way. We said, why not have like an event that we can use to just pass data back between a page or an application that's hosting a bot and your bot back end. And so we've been working really diligently to build this, what we call the back channel of a bot. So imagine, and I built a few samples that are specific to SharePoint. So it's just a SharePoint framework web part that displays a bot. But behind the scenes, it's actually calling locally on the SharePoint in the browser, I guess, to get the user's profile, who they are, and pass that back to the bot. So the bot already knows, it already automatically has the identity and context of where the bot is running.
So that's not something that the user has any involvement with. You're able to kind of, it's almost like you're doing like a back-end socket that they don't, that's no interaction or anything like that. You're just able to talk from the front end back to the bot to provide extra like metadata about the person to make it easier to do a login or to do some sort of a notification or something like that.
That's exactly right. And what you described there is kind of one way. It's the client talking to the bot, but it actually can work, that back channel can work in two directions. And this is where it gets really kind of confusing. But from my bot, I could say, hey, I can't personally run queries against SharePoint, but I know the client can. So will you go run this query for me and give me the results? So you can actually, in a sense, you can use the back channel as a proxy for calling services locally. Again, you can kind of have that two-way communication.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
That's an interesting way to get around the whole authentication issue with bots as well, right? Where, one of the big issues is you got to go sign into some of these things. And it's always driven me a little nuts. Like, so when you use a bot in Teams, how come it's just not authenticated to the Microsoft Graph already and gives you a certain level of permissions, and maybe the user has to consent or what have you. But with this back channel thing, it seems like, especially in the SharePoint case or in other embedded bot scenarios, I guess, you don't even have to have that bot authenticate to those APIs necessarily, because the user can do that in the client end, and then the back end of the bot doesn't need to know how to talk to SharePoint libraries specifically or whatever it happens to be. It could just send the queries back up to the client. Yeah, absolutely. And
cool. I started with the SharePoint framework because it seemed like a good candidate for this, because I don't think we've completely thought through all the security scenarios. Like you brought up a really good one. What happens if my bot needs maybe a higher level permission that even Teams has? Is we'd at least need them to consent to something.
Yeah.
But with something like the SharePoint framework, because of its model right now, it's something that already needs to be admin installed. It felt like a safe place to start with this.
Gotcha. No, that's really interesting. Auth is definitely one of the real curly ends of a bot that I don't think's been solved yet, right? Like you've talked about having to do the work with authbot and all that sort of stuff, but I think especially in the Microsoft ecosystem, like it'd be really nice to see like some pre-authentication stuff done and then maybe some consent up to get additional permissions, because it just seems crazy to me that you go to use a bot and then the first thing it asks you is like, can you just log in? And you're like, I'm already logged in. Like I'm using Teams, and it should just know who you are and have a certain level of permissions, or maybe there's a simple yes/no to granting permissions as part of the bot flow, as opposed to leaping out into another browser window or going through a whole auth flow just to use that bot. That seems really like still a little bit too much friction there for kind of mainly enterprise scenarios, to be honest. But yeah,
and I think that to some extent, one of the things that challenges us, at least with Microsoft, is because the bot framework is like this multi-channel thing where you build it once and it just automatically is supposed to work in all these other different channels. And if you're not familiar with the bot framework, a channel is just like another platform that you support. So a channel might be Skype, it might be Teams, it might be Slack, it might be Facebook Messenger. And we have a whole bunch of these, all the way down to something really simple like SMS messaging. And you got to think like those channels, like each one deals with things differently. So we're absolutely looking at how we can make auth more like native and transparent to an end user. And even things beyond that, like we find basic profile information, like just give me someone's name and what time zone they're in. Like those alone can be really helpful for some sort of bot logic that you might have. And we're working through making that more not so much like a third-party package that you have to bring into your project and more a native part of the bot framework.
So CJ mentioned a little bit too about Microsoft Teams and about the challenges around like logging in and stuff. I know you've done a lot of development around, or you seem to have been doing a lot more development recently around Microsoft Teams. How have you been using bots like in the scenario of Microsoft Teams, and kind of like can you share some of the things that you've done there and like any challenges or like what kind of a scenario does this enable that you think is unique with bots?
Yeah, with Teams, it's interesting because it's a little bit of a moving target right now being in preview. It's interesting. I don't know when this show is exactly going to be published, but you alluded to it earlier, is that we've said that Teams is coming out in Q1 of this calendar year. Well, if you look on a calendar, there's only a month left. So you could say we are basically imminently at the GA of Microsoft Teams. It should be coming very soon. But like my personal experience with it, it's kind of evolved a little bit because we just now got support for things like being able to use bots inside of a group message instead of like a chat, which are kind of two distinct things within Microsoft Teams. I started with Teams as over the holiday, I said, you know what, I'm going to kind of take this concept of taking an app that I already have and try to re-platform it into Microsoft Teams and see how challenging it was to do that. I already had a mobile app that I built last year that was very team-based. In fact, I'd already built it on top of the Office 365 groups scenario. And I guess I'll quickly talk about the scenario that I had, which was Microsoft, we use groups and teams for like communities, people that have an interest in a specific type of technology. It might be people that are interested in bots. It might be people that are interested in, Linux. And what we find is that those teams tend to get really large. And then you go to like one of our internal conferences like Tech Ready, and you know people's names, but you don't know their faces. So I just built a really simple little app that allowed me to go through and kind of do face quizzes. It's kind of like if you've ever been locked out of Facebook before, the way they do validation that you're the right person is they give you a face quiz of your friends. It'll show you a picture and it'll say, who is this? I was like, man, that would be super helpful for me, especially being a remote person. I live in Texas and my team is in Redmond. That'd be a great way for me to learn the people on my team so that when I see them, I'll know who they are. And
no, I laugh because I actually did a call with someone at Microsoft this morning on a Skype for Business call. And it's someone, I think someone joked about the fact like, oh, it's nice to finally see you. And someone else on the call kind of chimed in and goes, yeah, I'm actually not working remote today. I'm in the office, so I need everybody to turn the lights off because no one ever shares their camera, and it's just a black screen when I do a Skype for Business call.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
We get a lot of that. There's a lot of, at Microsoft, we don't have a lot of governance over profile photos, so you'll see like cartoon pictures and things like that. But
hey, I've got an app that can solve that. Just
CJ, you want to plug?
Really? Can you help us?
Definitely.
Nice.
Yeah. I've even got a bot that will help you with that. But anyway.
So this actually took it a step further and said, let's put some group photos in there. So it actually uses every Office 365 group and every Microsoft team actually has a SharePoint site collection behind the scenes. And so if I'm out and about, I could take a picture of someone or a group picture and tag all. It uses cognitive services to tag the faces and stores it back in the OneDrive site for that team. Well, I decided to try to take that, since it was already a group-based thing, and see if I could fit it into Teams. And I built like the quiz portion of it really quickly. In fact, I built such a good framework for asking questions. I even went out and bought a whole bunch of domains. I don't know if you guys are like that, but I'm like, hey man, QuizBot, that's a great idea. I'm going to just be able to make a generic quizzing framework for bots. And that came quick. What came slow was what I just described is, well, how would you ever get someone to upload a photo and tag it? Like, how are you going to actually, especially if it was like a big photo and you actually had to like draw like a square or a circle around someone's face, how would you ever be able to do that from a bot? And I'm not saying that it's not, I'm sure some of your listeners are way more creative than me and could come up with some sort of approach. But what I found was, well, the Teams like platform has this concept of a tab. And that kind of provided me the user interface I needed. And that's really where I started kind of having the aha moment of an app inside of Teams. Is it might be a bot, but it also might all be all these other things that they support, like tabs and connectors and things like that.
Gotcha. That's cool. I mean, it sounds really applicable, give more value out of Microsoft Teams and helping people just kind of get more stuff done without having to leave Teams. I mean, having it all right there makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it's nice. I mean, certainly the tab component of having a user interface is, I think, a really nice advantage because, again, as we start delivering more interesting controls in a bot, there still is, I think, really good scenarios for having that more like complete user experience. And what we found is when we've gone and worked with partners that are building bots, we'll show them this concept of a tab and they're like, oh wow, like that totally like solves the challenge that we had. So I think there's a bit of lack of, I think, understanding of what's possible inside of Teams, because I would say 50% of the partners I've talked to that are building bots for Teams, once they learned about a tab, they're like, oh, that's perfect. That's like we have a perfect use for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sort of gets you it gives you more real estate, more options. It's kind of like a full page part of an app versus kind of integrating with another part of the app, right?
Absolutely. It's like their version of an add-in.
Yeah, gotcha. Hey, so Teams is one surface area for this stuff, right? That's kind of the new kid on the block. It's in preview and it's going to GA real soon by the sounds of it. And that's all really well and good, but nobody's using that yet, right? They're starting to roll it out and starting to play with it, but it's not really got the surface area that is at least prevalent in the enterprise. Mostly we've been talking about enterprise, right? And that's really a lot of the talk about bots on the internet right now is all in the consumer space, which to me is just like utterly boring. And I'm like, let's talk about the enterprise, right? So, but what is big in enterprise is Skype for Business. And so I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but how could you launch a bot without Skype for Business? And I kind of know part of the answer behind this, and I don't want to stick you on the spot, but are we going to see chat and bots come to Skype for Business?
Yeah, you will. In fact, the Skype for Business team actually previewed a little bit of this at Ignite. It was kind of a bit of smoke and mirrors, I would say. But if you paid attention, I think it was either last week or the week before, I think it was February the 17th, Skype for Business announced the availability of what they call the Trusted Application API. And that's really the foundation for what will enable bots in Skype for Business. We really needed an underlying API layer that could enable a lot of this, especially for things like online. For Skype for Business Server, I always forget how to say that now. It used to be really easy, Link Server.
Skype for Business on-prem.
Yeah, there you go. The on-prem version of all this, It's had that idea of you could have like routing groups and different things that could deliver like bot capability. Like that, it's never been a big issue for on-premises. The challenge has been online, and with all the investments there with Skype for Business for like the E5 SKU for, voice, that we just haven't had the capability there in the cloud. So the Trusted Application API is the foundation to support this. And I would venture to say that you'll see something fairly soon concrete around Skype for Business. I would say like by the build time frame, you'll probably see something. I know that because that trusted application APIs out now. We actually had a team within Microsoft, one of the DX teams in the UK. They used the direct line channel. And again, without going into too much detail, of all the channels, there's this one channel in the bot framework called direct line. And it's kind of an ISV's way of like coding a bot. It's probably the best way of describing it. But they used the direct line, which is this generic coding channel, and built a Skype for Business channel with it. It's not by any means the official one, but they were like, we're sick of waiting. We're just going to build one. So yeah, it's definitely coming. I know it's been painful for people looking for enterprise scenarios, but I know the team is working heavily on trying to get that out.
Yeah, it seems to be the sort of the missing link in terms of opening up bots to the enterprise in a real big way. And, Teams is ultimately kind of where that'll end up going eventually, but it'll take customers a long time to get there, right? And, a year or two or what have you to get comfy and all of that before we see mass adoption. And so it just seems like Skype for Business is obviously the missing link. So that's really good to hear. That's certainly, like for us, we built a bot. We have a Skype for Business piece to that, but we've intentionally kept it pretty simple because we want to build out our Skype for Business bot the same way we build out our Slack bot with the bot framework. And although we use direct line in part of our Skype for Business bot, the APIs that we use behind the scenes to do it with Skype for Business are pretty heinous. So, we're kind of waiting for the trusted API stuff to ship, and obviously move to all bot frameworks. So that's really cool to hear. And I'm sure I think a lot of our audience is enterprise focused, and it's kind of the first question out of their mouths, like, how do I do this with Skype for Business?
Yeah, I think the one, I'll just caveat this, and hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying this, but you have to understand that if you look at all that's available in the bot framework for working with some channels, you have to understand that it also requires client changes. So think about like some of the rich controls that the bot framework supports, like buttons and, these, cascading selectors, all these different things. Like that actually requires, if we were to support that from day one in Skype for Business, you would need updates to every client to be able to render those controls and handle things. Yeah. Like clicking on a button has to do a post behind the scenes, and you might want to send data with it. And how do you handle hyperlinks and all these different things? So I guess the one thing I would say is that that is right now one of the things that we're behind the scenes with Skype for Business really trying to plan. Like, how can we roll this out and still have some of those rich experiences? Because they're going to require from day one, it may not even work if someone's client hasn't been updated to support these new types of things in a chat window. So yeah, we're certainly aware of it. Just hopefully that puts into perspective how big of an effort it is to actually land a new channel in something like Skype for Business.
Oh no, for sure. Well, looking forward to it anyway. That'll certainly open us up at Hyperfish to a lot more interesting things with bots than we are right now.
It's definitely interesting technology. It seemed when it first got announced, I think this was at Build last year when the bot framework got announced, it seemed a little bit of, I felt a little bit of tail wagging the dog, where I know some people were doing it and they're on the same time. That's when Facebook came out with their bot capability. I don't want to call it a framework, but their bot capability with Messenger. And I kind of felt like I was, almost showing my age. It was like, did I miss something? The bots are actually that big of a deal that we need frameworks and stuff. And what's been interesting is seeing companies that have been really taking advantage of it and not just building little fun samples, but actually building real stuff and building real solutions with this. So it's been really interesting. So, hey, Rich, thanks for coming on the show here. Before we wrap it up here, we want to introduce you to one of our fun little things that we like to do, where we like to let people share with some of their some picks and some things and fun stuff that they've been doing recently, they've been interested in. So I want to let you go ahead and go first and let you share some of our picks with our listeners. And again, we will have all of your picks up in the show notes for our listeners to go take a look at. But you sent me a couple here. What do you want to share with our listeners?
Sure. I guess I'll share both my little quick picks. I'm a developer by my day job, but by night I enjoy being a musician. So I do play different things like guitar and drums and bass and all those sorts of things. And we just moved to a new house and have a brand new baby as well, that I haven't been able to really play musical instruments. So we're planning to build a soundproof studio in my new house. So I've been doing a lot of research in soundproofing a room. It is absolutely fascinating. If you're like a geek that likes the details of how things work, get into like soundproofing. It's pretty amazing. So the first like just interesting thing is I'm sharing a link to a video of a guy that has like a multi-part series on how he turned a room in his house into a completely soundproof drum room. So it's pretty interesting stuff. You build like a room within a room and you insulate it in different ways, and you have to have your floor is like floating on top of another floor, but pretty cool stuff.
It's funny you say that. There's a person I know through Facebook. She works at Sonos, and the company that does all the really cool high-end speakers and everything. And she was saying how they've got a soundproof room and took pictures of it, and how, I can't remember the phrase she used. It was like either disorienting or disconcerting or whatever when you're in the room and it is a complete void of any sound at all, for where they can use to go test the different speakers and stuff. But just how it really messed with their head, like having something like so deadening. But I totally agree with you. I mean, I've spent a lot of time on the audio, the video technical side, more for the production and codecs and how do you clean up sound and being able to look at like not only just a waveform, but also being able to look like a spectrograph, and how do you see like breath and inside a set. The technical side of AV is just unbelievable how deep you can go.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think I know what you're talking about too. It's the quietest room in the world is actually in Minnesota at one of the universities up there, and apparently the longest anyone's been able to stay in the room at a time is like 15 minutes, because you actually get ill with how quiet it is.
Yeah, total sensory deprivation, right?
Yeah.
Microsoft has one as well, I think. It's called I think I'm going to say this wrong. I think it's called an anechoic chamber, I believe. You should go suss it out when you're in Redmond sometime and go find it. Go on a quiet room hunt, because apparently that's where they test all of the RF antenna technology and stuff to completely isolate from any outside noise, and it's one of the quietest rooms in the world. I don't know if it's the quietest, but it sounds like this other one is. But definitely go see if you can go for a hunt next time you're in Redmond. Go find it. It's in some basement somewhere.
Sounds like a plan.
Very cool. So you had another pick too as well you sent us.
Yeah, my other one, this is, I think, a hidden gem in Azure Active Directory, is I had actually built this on my own, not knowing that this flow was here, but this is talking about invoking an API from a text-only device. So, normally when we do things like OAuth, you need a browser to pop up. So even if you're on a mobile device, like for Azure AD, you end up using a browser control or some sort of control that provides your login. But what if you don't have that? So this is really cool for IoT scenarios. The scenario where this came into play and we discovered this existed. I mean, I'm pretty heavily involved in identity with Azure Active Directory. I didn't know this existed, but we have a kegerator at work. And what we decided is, we wanted people to have to scan their badge in order to actually make the tap work. So the tap is like secured behind our identity. But we were like, well, there's no user interface for something like this. How are we going to like get a token so that we can, validate the user? And we found this text-only device flow where it'll actually you can go to this aka.ms/device login. It'll give you like a magic number that is associated with your application and ultimately sign you in and give you access to tokens. And so to me, I had no clue this existed. I had built things very similar to this, where I did it with a Surface Hub, where you walk into a conference room and you don't want a user to have to sign into the actual Surface Hub. We used like a second screen type of scenario. And so I thought this was cool. I just discovered this about a month ago, and I've been playing around with all kinds of neat samples with it.
I wondered how that worked, because if you've done any Azure development with the CLI on OS X or OS 10 or whatever you want to call it, they use that exact same flow for the CLI to log in. Because on Windows, it pops up a browser and have you log in, right? But on OS 10, you go Azure login on the command line, and it gives you a URL, which is that device login, and a magic code, and you plug the magic code into your browser box and it authenticates you. Then the CLI comes back to life after it's authenticated. So it must be the same flow.
Yeah,
same flow.
It's the same. I use the same thing for doing a little Raspberry Pi thing to monitor the temperature on my fish tank, and to be able to kick it off and to log it in. I had to go into interactive SSH into my Raspberry Pi, and it asked me to go log in, gave you that code. So I just went straight over, opened up my phone, went to the, was it just AKMS/device login, and you plug in that, it's like a 6 or an 8 or a 10-digit code or something. And you see it log right in, you go back to the console and you just wait a few seconds, and all of a sudden it gets that call back. And, all right, we're good. I can start writing back to the storage tables. So that's pretty slick. It's very slick. Thanks for sharing those. CJ, do you have any picks for us today?
Come on, buddy. You know what my pick's going to be.
Oh, you're pickless. Oh, no, sorry. No, okay.
No, I know. No, I have one.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I am pickless sometimes, but not today. So you're already going to guess what my pick is. So SpaceX is sending 2 people around the moon next year, hopefully. And this was pitched to me on Twitter by somebody as, hey, they're going to send a couple of people around the moon. And it got me all excited, like, ooh, me. But as it turns out, you can't apply. And it's 2 people that have yet to be named. I suspect they're, like mega gajillionaire Silicon Valley tech tycoons, just thinking aloud here, that are going to pay SpaceX to send them on a mission. According to Elon, it'll be next year, but they've got to get crew rated and all that sort of stuff first. So maybe there may be a little bit of slippage in that plan, but we'll see. They're going to put them on the top of a Falcon 9 Heavy and launch them into space, and then do a quick sort of lap of the moon and come back. When I say quick,
7 days.
4-8 day mission, something like that. Yeah. And so, of course, I told my son this morning, and he's like, wow, that's really cool. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to apply. And he's like, oh, awesome. I was like, as soon as they open it up for outside participants, I may be starting a Kickstarter here shortly. Let's just put it that way.
I love the guy. I loved Elon's tweet about it, where he shared the press announcement, and his tweet was, hey, send me to the moon. And Elon's like, ... Okay.
Okay.
It was awesome.
So yes, so 2 dudes have approached them and gone, hey, we've got a boatload of money and we want to go to the moon. Can you do that for us? And he's like, okay, sure.
We can do it. That's pretty cool.
So yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes. But that was a pretty exciting development this week that I thought was pretty cool.
You don't want to share that because then like people are competing with you, CJ. Like they're competing for your spot. Like if the more people that are aware of it, right, you just maybe possibly send you further down the list of...
No, that just makes me feel better about when I beat them all.
Glasses half full.
I'm kidding.
Awesome. You got another pick for us? Is that it?
No, that's it.
That's an epic one.
Yeah. What about you? What's on your mind this week?
I've got a geek thing and then an interesting geek thing. So my geek thing is something called HADS, which stands for, hey, it's another documentation server. It's a...
Is this from Microsoft by any chance? Is this the Docs team having another crack at MSDN?
It's a Node.js project on GitHub that I'll have a link to. And essentially all it is it's just a way to take markdown authored documentation and host it as a website. It's kind of like the whole, I think, what's it called? Like Docs for You or something. There's a site, something like that. But it's nice because they've given you extra stuff to where if you use the proper heading tags, you can create a table of contents by just the double square brackets TOC, and at the end you can do the double square brackets index, and it will jump you straight to different phrases and terms that you hyperlink to and stuff. So very small little project, but it looks pretty cool. The other one that I have, this one was fascinating. You want to get stuck on reading for a while. This is from Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago, and it's a Silicon Valley hedge fund takes on Wall Street with an AI trader. And so somebody used deep learning and machine learning to basically implement their own high-frequency trader, but using machine learning to do it, and not doing it just the traditional way that the HFT guys are going. So a guy built this, tweaked around with it as just like a research project around machine learning, seeded it with $200 and was making something like $4,000 a month on it by just seeding a little bit of money and letting it just run on its own. It's got a couple little things where you can pull the plug and stuff, but it's going through and doing all trades 100% autonomously, making money for him. He's been approached by multiple people to give him a ton of money to actually use it. A bunch of different brokerage firms have approached him to see if they can license it, if they can get him hired on board and stuff. And he's like, no, this is just a fun little project. I'm like, oh. Okay, it's not open source. That's exactly what I was looking for. I was like, what's the GitHub project for that?
Then it'll be like War of the AIs, and it's just who can put it on the biggest, fastest machine ever.
Well, it's the biggest, fastest machine. But if you've read the Flash Boys book by Michael Lewis? I don't know if you guys have read that. From a tech point of view, that is fascinating to see how. I guess I should put this in my show notes as well, where you've got the different brokerage houses on, say, Wall Street, but there's a part where a lot of them also operate in New Jersey, but there's a trunk, an internet trunk or a network trunk that goes across the river, and there's a point of connection on either side of the river on the Hudson on the west side of Manhattan, I think. And what they did is they were leasing space on both sides to see the traffic going from the brokerage houses to the exchanges, and with just hundreds or thousands of a millisecond, seeing a trade that was being executed, and then they jump in front of that trade and put their trades in and just make fractions of a penny on trades and turn right around and resell it. And the way that the guy got around that was to create a legitimate trading, high-frequency trading thing. And what he did is basically got a bunch of fiber optic cable, and they called it the shoebox. They just spooled it in a giant spool so that it was effectively, when they would try and do their trades that jumped in front of his trades, they effectively were going from New York to Chicago and back 4 or 5 times before their trades got executed by just going into the shoebox. It's an awesome book. I highly recommend it. On the technical side, there's a business side, there's a stock side, and then there's a whole like tech side to it that was fascinating. So it's pretty cool. I knew one of the guys in the book too.
Nice.
That's what kind of got me really interested in it, but it was really good.
Hey, on a finishing note, just given this is the Microsoft Cloud Show, I think it's worth pointing out that AWS is completely on fire right now.
So just for our listeners, we are recording this on February the 28th. We've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves in recordings and stuff, but yeah, today AWS has completely blanked the bed today, which, it is on fire. Twitter's going nuts. I'm surprised. We're lucky we were able to get through this whole interview, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty much, I posted on Twitter, it's, the picture of when DOS boots up or Windows boots up and it can't find a bootable device. I was like, that's AWS right now. It's like, no bootable device, insert boot disk and press any key. That's what the internet feels like right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
It's amazing how many sites are affected, though. I got to tell you, a ton.
It is.
I can't even post Giphies to Slack, for goodness sake. My world is crumbling, AC.
Oh, man. My CDN is offline, where I had people were like, I want to go sign up for your site. I just made a bunch of changes to the site, too, this morning. And they're like, your site's completely hosed. I was in the middle of an interview, and I was like, shoot. I'm like, oh, those are all CDNs. Okay, I can't touch. That's not me. I'm okay.
The glory of cloud computing when you rely on 3 providers.
Hey, it's nice, though, because when it's now, the internet's broken for us, but guess who can fix it? Not the 3 of us. That's true. That's the nature of the cloud. Somebody else's day sucks. Yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah, I'm pretty stoked I'm running on Azure right now. Let's put it that way.
So is Satya. Cool. Well, hey, Richard, thanks a lot for taking the time to talk to us today. I know we went a little bit longer than we intended to, but this is a great discussion. I had a lot of fun hearing about bots and hearing about Microsoft Teams. So really, really eager to share this with our listeners and see what they have to say about bots and Teams. You got any parting words for us?
Check it out. I mean, hopefully, maybe we'll even be at a GA when this is published. So build some stuff.
Awesome.
Build some stuff. I like it.
Will do. We will build some stuff. Awesome. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Richard. And we will see you on your podcast as well, the Office 365 Developer Podcast. And we'll have links to everything we talked about and a bunch more of links you shared in the show notes around bot framework and team development and all of our picks as well. So we'll have all that stuff in the show notes, and it will also be in your inbox to all of our email subscribers. If you're not subscribed to the email list, go sign up today so you're not trying to track down a boatload of links that we mentioned in the show today. Cool. Thanks a lot, Richard, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Did you like this episode? Send us a tweet about it and drop us a 5-star review in iTunes. Word-of-mouth recommendations are the most effective ways for us to grow the show. We'd really appreciate it. If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text. We'll record it as a WAV or an MP3 and provide a link so that we can play your question on the show. Our theme music is an excerpt from Evaporated Air by Monk Turner, used under Creative Commons. You can subscribe to us in iTunes and the Google Play Store by searching for Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find show notes of each episode. You can also find us on Facebook, searching for Microsoft Cloud Show, or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. And finally, sign up to our mailing list by heading to our website and entering your email to interact with us, participate in upcoming interviews, and other cool stuff. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.